Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Tuesday, May the 12th, and I'm Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And my name is Sam Coates from Sky News. Welcome to Politics at Sam and Anne's, the podcast that gives you everything you need for the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes, just in time for your commute.
And we start with news that's about politics, but isn't actually political, but it's going to set the agenda today. And that is the story that the Prime Minister's private domestic property has been subject to a possible arson attack after it emerged that there'd been 3 suspicious fires in 4 days. And 2 were in properties linked to Keir Starmer. The third was in a vehicle also connected to the Prime Minister.
This all started to come out yesterday afternoon when it emerged that the fire brigade had been called to Keir Starmer's £2 million home in North London. They'd actually been called at 1:11 in the morning after a resident heard, according to the Times, a loud bang like shattered glass and a fire broke out. 2 fire engines arrived and the fire was brought under control about 20 minutes later at 1:33 a.m. Now, all this information is in the public domain. Keir Starmer rents out this house and has done for some months. He and his family, of course, live in Downing Street.
Last night, it emerged that on Sunday, officers had been called to another property linked to Starmer. And it has to be said, we didn't know that he had a second property. So there you go. I'm sure that'll be clarified. And one person had to be helped to safety. So it does sound pretty serious.
I mean, it really sounds pretty grim. On a human level, you must feel quite powerless if you're living in Downing Street. You're having to rely on security. You're not at the property. It's under attack. It is just all really grim. Because the Prime Minister is a high-profile figure, the Metropolitan Police says that Counter-Terrorism Command is leading the investigation. And I have to say, I just can't think at all, in my years of reporting politics, of a comparable incident. So anyway, we will see how that unfolds.
It is true, of course, Sam, that given the status of the Prime Minister and his seniority in politics, his exposure, that it would be led by a counter-terrorism unit at this stage. We don't know, of course, whether that is what turns out to be underlying this story or if it's some other kind of potential grudge. It's interesting because I profiled Victoria Starmer a little while ago, and she was in that property for quite a long time as they made that transition into Downing Street and dealt with the implications for their family. You know, so the Starmer family had been living there until not that long ago. Thankfully, they were safely out of the way in Downing Street at the time. The property is rented out, but that's obviously clearly a risk factor for whoever was renting it. And it struck me, just having covered politics in various countries, we've been pretty lucky in the UK that when they're not in their official residences, our most senior politicians do live in pretty normal, if prosperous, conditions, nowhere near as gated as many of their peers in the US, for instance, with massive security. And there will have to be new threat assessments out of this story when it unfolds.
Well, we'll see what happens. Right, we ought to do a handbrake turn and get on to more traditional fare. It's Tuesday, so our regular Tuesday feature, which is the Sky News Times YouGov weekly voting intention poll. Now, let me put you out of your misery. That sees Reform top on 28, which is down 1 a week ago. Labour on 23, up 1. Tories on 18, up 1. Lib Dems unchanged on 16 and Greens on 9. So that means that Reform are again way ahead, particularly of the Tories. Reform 10 percentage points ahead of the Tories and kind of doubles down on that shift post-local elections of the Tories having really quite a big deficit to Reform and Reform really having quite a big lead in line with what we saw on local election polling day. I was out and about last night on the terrace outside next to the River Thames, outside the Houses of Parliament, chatting to Conservatives who are not in the cheeriest of spirits, it has to be said. They were reflecting about their own role yesterday. Now, yesterday was a big day for the Prime Minister because he was announcing his immigration crackdown. Did you know, Anne, that the Tories also announced their own immigration crackdown yesterday? Because, I mean, bluntly, I didn't. One of them barreled over and said, well, of course, what they did yesterday was they introduced their own bill, the sort of immigration crackdown bill. And I said, well, I've been covering this story all day. I've literally not heard anything about this at all. And I checked my emails. There are no press releases about this. There are no WhatsApp about it. But clearly it's the thing that they were talking about in, Tory shadow minister circles. They thought I'd know about it, and there was quite a lot of tutting at the leader's office and Chris Philp's office at the fact that nobody had any idea that this was happening. Now, this is a piece of, it's one of those kind of political stunt pieces of sort of fake legislation that's never going to go anywhere, and it just sets out in a new form what they would do. But nevertheless, what is the point in a leaf falling in the political forest if nobody ever notices?
Or to do another forest metaphor, if you hide your light under a bushel, you have to be very sure to tell people where the bushel is. Um, Following up from what you told me when you got back from what you call your hobnobbing on the terrace, which I call drinking with MPs, I then had a look, and actually your Tory contacts were right. It was there on X. It had been put out in social media, and I wondered if really that was the plan, was to reach people, or those target voters, or people that they wanted to reach with this on social media, rather than through the more traditional ways of putting out press releases and flagging it up to mere journalists. That's just a hypothesis on my part.
Maybe it's a way of convincing Kemi Badenoch that you're doing something, because she seems to live on the social media according to myth. But what is the problem with also putting out a press release, also putting out a WhatsApp? Sure, have a social media strategy. Maybe tell people about that as well, because we don't all hang off the conservatives.com X account. We should maybe, but we don't.
Yeah, whatever you're going to announce, please, people, call Sam Coates. Otherwise, we'll never hear the end of it. Shall I just say? Shall I just say what was? I should be a bit more serious about this, but it did have a slightly odd. When you looked at it as well, it looked like a playbill for some music. I mean, it had a certain kind of punchiness when you found it. I take your point that it was a bit like finding the bushel in the forest. Shall I just run you through what was in it, just in case you've forgotten some or anyone else didn't notice it? I mean, what struck me about it was it had a sense of a list of things that were, if you like, elephant traps for Keir Starmer and the government after that big announcement of the white paper. If you like, waiting for stuff to go wrong, you're putting down a checklist of stuff that could potentially go wrong for Labour, so that you could say, you should have done it differently. So the first thing, and I do think this is a justifiable line of attack by the opposition, is a legally binding cap, though of course that is not on immigration. That is not in the government's plans. And you can just hear that question being asked again and again and again. Well, what is this number? What are you aiming for? Why won't you tell us? So I thought that was reasonable. Of course, there is an answer from Labour, and there will be also from Reform coming at the Conservatives from the other direction, saying, well, you kept setting these numbers, you couldn't hit them, so why are you complaining now when other people don't set the numbers? But I still think that's an area of debate. There were really nerdy bits about GDPR reviews for foreign criminals, basically that you could get into their data and therefore bring them to justice, get them out of the country much more easily, age testing for asylum seekers, if you like, quite nitty-gritty bits of policy, which, as you point out, is unlikely that Conservatives are going to be in a position to apply any time soon. But one word struck me, and I think we're going to come and talk about language in just a moment generally, Sam, on immigration and asylum. It talked about disapplying the Human Rights Act. Now, why is that interesting? Because it brings Kemi Badenoch, who must have approved this, a lot closer to that position of leaving the ECHR, the European Court on Human Rights, that she eschewed in the leadership contest, a demarcation line, if you like, with her and Robert Jenrick and others on the right. Well, if you're disapplying the Human Rights Act, you may not be leaving the court in other ways, but you're pretty much clearly saying on immigration, we don't think the court should have jurisdiction. So in some ways, if you're leaving it by degrees, I would suggest.
Yeah, if you don't follow rulings of the court, then you put yourself in breach of the court. And if you fail to rectify that, if the court instructs you to do so, then basically you are out of the human rights. So that's a method of leaving, a sort of passive method of leaving. If that is now the Conservative position, then you would expect them to make more fanfare about it. It clearly is the Conservative position, because that is on the Conservative Twitter feed. I'm sure we'll hear about more of that later today. It's funny, we focus on the Tory plans for migration, but Reform UK want to be treated like a big boy party. So, I mean, we ought to give them the same level of scrutiny, the same level of kind of combing over their plans. So that's what I did yesterday when I interviewed Nigel Farage. He wanted to appear on camera simply to do a victory lap to say, Keir Starmer's immigration agenda is all down to me. He's running scared of reform. Look at me. Fair enough. Now, we weren't going to give him the sort of free hit on that. I thought instead we'd look at what he'd said about migration in his manifesto last year, which, as far as we know, still applies, is still the blueprint. That's the croissants coming and the crumpets coming out of the bread bin and going in the toaster, in case you're wondering what that noise is. Anyway, Nigel Farage, I put to him, asked him for a little bit of clarity, because if you actually go back to that contract/manifesto, what it says is that Reform UK would have a freeze on non-essential migration. But it then says it would allow people with essential skills, mainly around healthcare, must be the only exception. So in the manifesto for the Reform UK Party, there is very clearly, in black and white, a loophole that could allow an unknown number of people to come into the country. Now, if that loophole had been a centrepiece of Keir Starmer's plan or of Kemi Badenoch's plan, you could tell from space that Nigel Farage would go to town and mock it and ridicule it. He'd be asking questions like, so how many people are going to come in under this loophole? Is it 100,000? Is it 1 million? Isn't this evidence that you're soft on migration? So I sort of turned the tables on Nigel Farage and asked him for a number. You know, how many people could end up coming in using this loophole? And he didn't have any answers. But he did make a commitment, and I'm going to brand this as Sky News scoop, because I haven't heard him say this anywhere. He said, before the next election, Reform UK, he would give me a number, a hard cap number of the number of people that could come in. So, you know, we're asking for numbers from the Tory party. Labour say they're not going to give us a number. As of now, Reform UK have committed to give us a hard cap number on the number of people that could come in, skilled workers, to plug particularly healthcare gaps in the next Parliament ahead of their manifesto. So keep badgering Nigel Farage for that if you're interviewing him. I wonder where they get to on that. But making Reform UK sort of answer questions in the same way that other political parties do is just what it's like to join the adult swimming pool these days if you're in Reform UK.
At the adult swim end. And also, I was just looking at the language that you point out there, Sam, essential skills mainly around healthcare. Well, would that include, for instance, social care and
he
carers,
spluttered when I asked.
Because that is a really sensitive area for Labour, but therefore also sensitive for reform. Well, yeah, I was going to say, what was the response?
He said that we have to train. We don't train enough nurses, and we have to get them in from places like Mali, and that's a disgrace. He actually sidestepped the specific question about whether the healthcare exemption could include social care workers. So I didn't get anywhere on that. Maybe somebody else can have a go on that specific thing as well. But all of this stuff is what happens when you're top of the polls and you're talking about maybe Nigel Farage being Prime Minister. We absolutely have to hold him to the same standard on policy discussion that we hold everybody else to. So the question is, now, is Nigel Farage soft on migration?
That is a provocative question indeed. If we're going to talking about language, just the last very skinny point on that. Whenever I see the word around from a politician, mainly around healthcare, that is also a sign that, that there is evasion going on. Let's talk a bit more about language and the way that Keir Starmer's lexicon worked out yesterday, particularly that phrase, the island of strangers, that he said Britain risked becoming if it didn't get a grip on immigration and particularly on those seeking asylum by the non-approved routes, aka small boats and the like. Now that has caused a lot of pushback. Sam, you'll have heard it when you were out on the terrace doing your wine-fueled research, I like to think, last night. But also I have seen a lot, certainly in my social feed and from contacts, on worries on the Labour side, I think in particular, that there are echoes here, some even hearing echoes of Enoch Powell, the infamous Rivers of Blood speech, because of the strong use of that sense of a kind of, we are an island nation in a bit of a fortress, and if too many of you come here, it will end. And I found this was an even odder phrase actually from Keir Starmer, a squalid chapter of rising inward migration. Now, clearly, Keir Starmer wanted to draw a line under previous positions that Labour had taken and show that he was, as you put it, at the adult end of the swimming pool on this issue. But this language did have small p populist overtones, and I wonder what you made of it.
Well, the big point is, on migration, as with so much else, it's just important to say that the kind of Overton window, which is the kind of set of policies and language that is deemed acceptable at any one time has just moved a long way on this, right? Things that were considered completely unacceptable a decade ago, maybe only, for instance, said by Nigel Farage, are now being said by the Labour Prime Minister of the country, right? And it is always hard to judge, to find yardsticks against which to judge things. But let me just give you this one point. My friend and colleague Trevor Phillips got in touch, the presenter of the Sunday morning Sky programme, and he said that he'd been hearing the words "island of strangers" several times, and something was nagging away at him, and then it finally struck him because it took him back almost exactly 20 years. And he recalled that someone once made a very similar speech, which included the words, "We are becoming strangers to each other." And that was a speech, Sleepwalking to Segregation, in September 2005 by one Trevor Phillips, who at the time was chair of the Campaign for Racial Equality. It was roundly rubbish by the soft left at the time. David Miliband called the remarks fatuous. Now that kind of language is being used by the Prime Minister of the day. So this is what I mean about yardsticks being tricky. Trevor was using that in 2000, and that a version of that language in 2005. Now Keir Starmer's doing it today. Sure, Keir Starmer wants to attract attention, but isn't that what good politicians do? They try and shock people into listening.
Yes, I think I possibly see it a bit differently. I understand exactly what you mean and what Keir Starmer was trying to do, a sort of be in no doubt kind of message. Tony Blair did that very effectively, didn't he? He would just start using language that people didn't associate with Labour, that sounded more friendly to the right of centre, pro-business, whatever. But I do think this is a bit different. And another word leaps out at me here, if you like, when you get into the sort of linguistic undertone, and that's island. And that use of not country, but island, there's often been a rhetoric. And I don't mean to say among this is extreme at all, but I just mean among those who have a more nativist bent to talk about the country as an island and the sceptred isle, to go back to this England kind of vibe. And that did leap out at me. And I wondered whether there is a danger here. You feel a bit, or at least I feel that this certainly feels like language that has been written for Keir Starmer. I don't mean that he doesn't mean the policy, that he's not genuine, but you have to be a bit careful. It's a fine line between then sounding a bit inauthentic, like you did the research, you did the focus groups, you got this kind of reformy, sort of somewhat right-wing language as was, you grafted onto this centrist prime minister and you hope that it flies. There is the risk of sounding a bit inauthentic. Do we really believe that Keir Starmer talks like that when he's just sitting around the kitchen table or with his mates or even talking to people that he meets out and about? Well, you could say, yeah, well, he will now because he's adopted it. But I would have a mild concern looking at it that it doesn't quite sound like him. And I think he can sound very good, Keir Starmer, when he's really passionate about something. But sometimes when the language goes a little bit too far, you think, is that really Keir Starmer? Did someone put that in front of him and say, I think you should say this?
Okay, I'm going to leave that topic there. I want in 60 seconds to draw everybody's attention to something going on up in the Scottish Parliament today. It'll have resonance. We'll talk about this subject in full later this week. That is that there is a big vote today on assisted dying in Scotland. Now, the last time they had a vote up there, it was 2015. It was defeated 82 to 36. But the Liberal Democrat MSP Liam McCarthy is putting forward his proposals. He's brought them in line in some ways with the English and Welsh proposals by raising the age from 16 to 18 that you could take advantage of the service in Scotland. So it's brought into line. The thing that strikes me, Anne, the thing to watch out is the biggest names in Scottish politics are all against this. Right. First Minister John Swinney, against. Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes, against. Nicola Sturgeon said that she worried about the potential for internal coercion, against. Humza Yousaf, another ex-SNP leader, against. And Sarwar, he's come out against as well. The Scottish government is neutral, the SNP government up there. Keir Starmer is missing the next vote on Friday when it comes back to the Commons. There is a bit of a vibe shift around this subject. We'll go into this more later this week, but it is one of the biggest things going on during this Parliament for England and Wales. Today it's happening in Scotland. keep an eye out.
Absolutely. It's good that you spotted that for us from Scotland, Sam. And I do think, as it's coming into a very heated phase about the passage of the bill south of the border, there are also quite a lot of arguments about the language being used by some of the proponents. So I think this is going to get even more heated. And we should just come back to it another day when we've got a bit more time on the podcast.
Let's do that. We're going to wrap it up. As I just was speaking, there's been a snap from the Press Association. Crikey. Regular earnings growth decreased by 5.6% in the 3 months to March and was 2.6% higher after taking inflation into account, according to the ONS. That's going to drive the day as well. But we've run out of time. So we will see you tomorrow and speak to you tomorrow on Politics at Sam and on Wednesday. See you then.
Back to it then.
The first 100 days might be over, but President Trump is showing no signs of slowing down.
America will soon be greater than ever before.
So we're continuing to follow every twist and turn of this remarkable presidency.
And trying to make sense of what it all means for the US and for the rest of the world.
So join me, James Matthews.
Me, Martha Kellner.
And me, Mark Stone.
For Sky News Trump 100, wherever you get your podcasts.